Hello and welcome to this second part of creating tables and graphs in Excel. In this part of the video I plan to produce a graph of your Hooke's Law results. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is to open up your file. Hopefully you've saved it with a sensible name in a directory that you can find, and here's mine now. Okay, while I'm doing this, I want you to remember that if at any point you need some extra help, you can just pause the video, you can replay the video, and you can go over it several times. So this is the graph that or the table that we generated in last session's video. And what we're now wanting to do is we're now wanting to plot a graph of force against extension. Hopefully I'll go through this nice and simply, and things won't go wrong, but we'll see how much editing I need to do. Just some of the language. When you've talked in school, you've probably talked about a line graph, and that's what we're hoping to produce, a line graph of your force against extension. However, Excel refers to this as a scatter graph, so it's something that you'll need to consider. So the first thing we need to do is to highlight the data that we're going to plot the graph of. In this case, it's the force against the extension. Hopefully I'll take you through step by step. Now the first thing we need to do is highlight the data in column B, where our forces are. So as I normally do, and I'm sure you'll know, compress the left-hand mouse button, highlight the data by dragging it down. Now, before you let go, put your finger on the control button, okay? And then let go of the mouse. What that does is it means that you're holding on to that data while we go to the next column that we want to plot a graph of, which is the extension column. You don't need to do the control button if the columns are side by side, but in our table, they're not. So if I hold down the control button and then I start highlighting column H, just as before, pressing down the left-hand mouse button, dragging it down with the scroll bar, and now I can take my finger off the control button, and you should have highlighted the two columns that we want to plot a graph of. Now I'm hoping as well that the column on the left becomes your X axis, and the column on your right becomes your Y axis. Sorry, I'll have to do that again. Okay, and then we're going to go up to the top of the screen where it says insert. And what we're going to insert is a chart. So we're looking at this part of the ribbon, that's chart. It's not the easiest chart to see, and it's this button here, which is called an insert XY scatter graph. So we're going to click on that bit there. And although these look what we want to do, we actually want this graph here. So we want this first one, a scatter graph, and it says compare at least two sets of values or pairs of data and show the relationships. That's what we want to do. So look at your data. This looks not bad. I've not chosen the best set of data, so there are sort of mistakes in this, but I just wanted you to use a real set of data. So we've already got the right idea. If you end up with two lines, it's probably because you've got a blank in the document, in which case just highlight the data. So go and do the same thing again, but don't highlight the headings, just the data source. Now the problem with this is it's very small and it's on the same page as we've got before. Okay, we want it on a separate page to fill the page. So you need to go along to the tabs at the top, click on chart design, and we're going to move the chart. Okay, so move this chart to another sheet. So that's what we're going to do. Click on there. We're going to put it in a new sheet, and we're going to call it something sensible. So let's call it Hooke's Law. And I suggest you put your name on it as well, because they're all going to look very similar. When you click OK, that brings up my graph in a completely new table, and you can see that that fills the page, and that's much better because it concentrates on what we've got. Now it's nothing like what we want to finish with. And before, I've recommended that we click on some of these things here and chosen graphs that are templates that are ready made. But what I've found is none of these at the moment correspond to the graph that's closest to the graph we want to do. Although there is one, this one here, okay, these little dots are a real problem and the lines are a real problem. So what I'm going to recommend is, rather than you picking these ready-made templates, we're going to start from scratch and do this one ourselves. So the first thing we want to do is we want to click on this little plus symbol in the top right hand corner, and that gives us the elements we might want to put in our table. Now, it's not fixed, we can go back and change these as well, but we want our axes labeled, so tick that. We do want a chart title on our graph, so we're going to tick that. We do want a chart title, we do want grid lines, and eventually we're going to want a trend line, but at the moment I suggest we don't tick that because that might get in the way of trying to edit our points. So if we just click with that, and then if you unclick that, that goes away. So now you can see that we have two boxes so that we can type in our data. Again, I'm hoping that you remember which is which. So make sure that you look and check. So our last point is 1 and between 3 and 4, 3.5 and 4. So if I'm just not sure, go back to your table. So along the bottom is my biggest point is 1. So that's going to be my force. Up the side, 3.75 is my extension. That's exactly how I want to do it. Okay, so I've got here that this is my force. So I can type in force. Don't forget to put the units, which is newtons. We tend to put a slash solders, but you can put it in brackets if you want. You can type the word, but I recommend you just typing /n. And I'm trying to change the font, but I can't do that at the moment. And that comes up there, force in newtons. Again, click on this title and then go up to this bottom box here, and then you can type it in, extension, okay, slash, and my extension was measured in centimeters. Yours might be measured in millimeters, meters. Just make sure that it's correct. Okay, and enter, and that corrects that there. If you're needing a different font, so for example, you're wanting to superscript something, so you would say t squared or meters per second, then you've got the subscript and the superscript here, but it's quite tricky. You have to highlight the buttons there. If you do it just clicking here, the whole thing will be superscript, so that's not what we want. What I am going to do though, is just for me, so to make it clearer for you, I'm going to increase my font size of the whole document. Hopefully, I don't recommend you do that, but that's just so that you can see what's going on. Now, as you look here, my title is given the word extension, which seems weird. It always tends to give you this term up here as a title, and that's not what we want. So we can put a proper title in here. So again, we can either type in this box here and overwrite that. Hooke's law, be good in English, and Mrs. H. Okay, or we could have typed that in this box here and return to enter it. So it's looking not bad, like a graph. A couple of things we don't want to, we want to change. The first thing, what we've got here is we've only got grid lines, what's called a major grid line. We've only got lines every 0.2 Newton across, and that's not very good for a graph. So how we can do that is we can click on here, and that will format our axis. Now I'm right clicking to format the axis. Okay, you can also get it, I think, from the menus here. Okay, so if I click on that, that can change it as well. So I've right clicked and we're going to now format this axis. Okay, which gives us different menus here. I don't think, again, these are very intuitive, i.e. they're not clicking where you think you'd be clicking. Okay, we've got our axes options. Okay, if we click on this one, we've got whether we fill them in or lines. We've got this one, whether we, and we don't want posh things and things like that. We do want to look at the alignment, okay, and we've got some axes options here. So we're going to look at these, okay, and this is the first thing we want to do. We want to change this scale. Now, we've got a bit of a dead space up here, between here and here, okay, and I don't think we need that, but I wouldn't put my last point in the corner. So rather than going to 1.2 as newtons as my force, I'm going to select that and change that to 1.1. Now be careful when we do that, because you might find this axis suddenly changes as well. It didn't. Okay, so, oh yes it does. So I'm now no longer starting from 0, and that's a bit of a pain. Okay, so if I go back to that options there, by clicking again, I need to be on the axis options, format axis. Okay, I want to set my axis as starting from 0. Okay, I want my major axis to be 0.1. So instead of just having going up in 0.2s, 0.4, 0.6, I want more lines of that. So I'm going to change that to 0.1, and I'm going to change my minor axis, which at the moment is not switched on, to 0.01. That will obviously give me 10 boxes per major grid line, or 0.02. Okay, now they're at the moment not going to come up because I've not actually switched my grid lines on, but we'll see that later. So here you can see I've set my minimum to 0, my maximum to 1.1, and you adjust yours depending on your data. Your data might be completely different to mine. So I've set my major tick lines to 0.1, my minor tick lines to 0.01. Okay, we don't want a logarithmic scale. We don't want to change into any of these units. That makes it more complicated, but there might be something that you want. Don't want my values in reverse order. Okay. Again, you might want to see that you can get these little tick lines, and that gives you a little line down here. You can switch those on if you want to the outside. Switch the minor grid lines, I would probably put none. Labels, again, you can move the label position, high, low, none, but we definitely want to. So next to the axis is what I'm doing. And again, here at the number, you get the opportunity to change whether you want that to the right number of significant figures. But if you've done that in your table, it should come up like that already. So I'm quite pleased with that, happy at that, apart from I need to turn on my major grid lines, and my minor grid lines, which I'll do in a minute. Okay, so I think I'm happy with all that. Don't want to fill them, don't want to change the line color. Sometimes when I found later that if you tick on one of the boxes, the line is very, very pale. And so what I suggest is we use these two here, 25%, and the one after that for my major grid lines. So again, it makes it slightly darker so that you can actually see them when you print them off, if you do need to print them off. So how do you turn on the minor grid lines? Well, again, if you go to your axis, right click, you'll be able to get it at the ribbon bar at the top. You can see here that it's saying format major grid lines or add minor grid lines. These menus here change depending if they're switched on or switched off. So we already have our major grid lines fixed on, so we're getting a chance to format that. So we're going to add our minor grid lines. And you can see that those 10 minor grid lines that we put on before have now appeared on the graph. So you can see that this is definitely now looking like a piece of graph paper, which is what we want it to look like. We can do the same up the side. We can change the scale here, but I actually quite like this scale. This scale is going up in 0.5s. I think that's a nice distance across for my data. So I'm quite happy to do that. If you want to, though, again, you can format the axis. You do want to make sure that you've added your minor grid lines, but they're already showing anyway. Okay, you can format and change the colours. So again, if you think it's going to be a bit pale, you want to change that colour. And as you can see, I can see I'm on the major grid lines, major meaning the darker lines. If you get a piece of graph paper, you tend to have a dark one and a not so dark. So I've changed this to 35% for these ones. You see that now showing up a bit more, and I'm going to do the same for this one as well. Okay, so format major grid lines. Whoops, was that my minor? Format my major grid lines, and again I'm going to make that this bottom here, I think it's 35%. So they just stand out that little bit better when you print them out. So I'm quite pleased with that so far. Next thing we can look at is trying to sort out these points. Now, again, if you're doing an exam, you want better points than that, okay? And so we're going to go back to here. We're going to, no, we're not. I'm going to back to format your data series here. So format data series. So you can find that again in the top menus, which will be up here, so you can format up here. But I'm going to right click format data series, switch that one off, and I get a menu here. Okay, so all the time you need to make sure that you're looking at what you're ticking on. So again, there's things here that you can just have a play sometimes, because that's when you find things. Now this is important as well. You've got the marker options or the line, and don't muddle those up. Okay, at the moment we haven't got a line. We don't want a line at the moment. We want the actual markers to change. So make sure that you're clicking on this marker option here, and this brings you up a whole new menu again. Okay, we don't want anything fancy. Science isn't about making it colourful. You're not making a bright poster like you might in other subjects. In science, we want to make a type of graph that you would have done on graph paper. So for my marker options, again, click up here. We want to choose one of the built-in marker options, and the ones that I really recommend are little crosses. But again, you might find that you can't find the little cross. I think it's this one here, and that is because it is currently filled in. So if I click no fill on that, I'm hoping, okay, and no border around it, okay, then that should come up, and it's not, whoops, then it should come up, and don't want to fill it. Let's see what I've got. Nope, so my points are away. Marker options, there we go. Maybe I'll make it a bit bigger. So don't want to fill them. I do want to make sure that the colour I do want to make sure. So what I want when I click on the marker options, I don't want to fill the marker in. I do want a border for my options, and I want to make this quite dark, so I recommend you choosing black. Don't have any transparency on your points, and a good width is about 0.75%. Sorry, points. Again, make sure that you're clicking on your marker options, choose the built-in, and the best one to choose, it's not very visible, is the little cross. Okay, you can use a plus sign. The problem with the plus sign is that if it actually comes across one of your boxes, okay, because it's a plus sign, you're not going to actually see it very well. Okay, I wouldn't go for anything radical. Okay, definitely the cross is the best. So if I click on that, you can see now that I've got a nice set of points. They're not in a great line, but that was the nature of our data. So most of it's finished. We've got our axes, we've got our labels on our axis, we've got a title, we've got our points plotted here. We've changed the colour of our major grid lines. If you want to change the colour of your minor grid lines, again, you can click on the grid lines like we did here. and this comes up with this menu. You might want to change that colour to a little bit darker. As I said, the one that I found best is the 25%. Okay, that might be too dark for you. Again, we can do the same on this one. Click on our minor grid lines. So we've got our, our axis. I want to click on the axis, format our minor grid lines. Again, I'm making the colour of those the 25% one. And then the major grid lines, I'm going to just make those a little bit more brighter. Sorry. Format major grid lines. I'm going to make that a little bit darker, so the 35% one. Okay. So all we need to do now is plot the line of that. You can do that by going to the chart elements here and clicking on the trend line. And as you can see, that comes up here. Okay. Or you can again go back to your, if I turn that one off, you can go back to your format axis. I use that by right clicking. Okay, and then I get this add trend line menu. And you can see that this brings me up my trend line menu here. Okay, if you don't want this, if this is in the way, you just click that on and off. That's like a toggle switch. Now this is pretty good. It's looking like a straight line. As you can see, it's not going through the origin. That doesn't matter. But it's a dotted line, and we don't want a dotted line. We want a straight line. So we're going to have to change that. So again, if we go to this button here that looks like a paint pot, okay, we want a solid line. All right, again, pick a colour that is going to stand out. You might not want it deep black. That might make it too difficult to stand out. You don't want it to be dashed. You want a solid line. Okay, you don't want anything compound. As you can see, this line now is really quite thick, too thick. So again, get that transparency down to 0. And again, I recommend a good width being about 0.75. Otherwise, it's just too much and it goes across too many of your grid lines. Don't want anything fancy on there. What we do want to do, though, is we want to be able to put some data from our grid lines, from our trend line. So again, if you plot this graph, that's to do with the data. And again, you might want to change the line. For this experiment, the linear one is correct, but sometimes just plotting that through, okay, you might want to have a look at different options. Oops, is that clear? And you can get different trend lines. You could put like a polynomial, and you can see, well, does that fit my data better? Maybe, maybe not. That certainly is not what we want. So generally in physics, we'll be using a linear line, but not always. Another two buttons that's really useful are the ones at the bottom. Okay, the first one, oops, sorry, I'll come back to that. The first one is display equation on the chart, which is this one here. Okay, and we'll come back to that later. And this one here is a statistical analysis just to show how close your points are to a straight line. So if I move that box out of the way, because it's on my line, so that's in the way. So move it to a place where it's not going to interfere with your data. So either here, or you could put it right up there. That might be another place. Remember, my font size is really big just so you can see. So you wouldn't necessarily need it that big. Okay, maybe putting that up there. And I don't mind if you colour that in. If the points are all in a straight line, your R squared value would be 1. Ours looks quite good because it's 0.994, but really you can see here that there's quite a lot of spread of this data. So you're looking for something like 0.99 something and a high number here. Okay, if your points aren't any relationship, you can still put a straight line through and it might come out as 0.6 or 0.7. So it gives you an indication of how straight your points are close to the line, and that might be something you can comment on your evaluation. Now, just to say that I've gone back because I redid the trend line, I've gone back and it's dotted. So again, remember that's on this menu here. the line, I want it not dashed, I want it a straight line. I wanted it 0.75 thick. I want it a colour that's not going to be too difficult to see. So they've suggested that blue. I quite like that blue. Okay. And I think that's pretty much finished. So I would be quite happy with that graph. Oh, no, I wouldn't, because here I've not started from 0, although you can see that my line doesn't cross at 0. So it's up to you. I could change that to 0, 0. Remember, let me show you how to do that. So if I right click on that, format the axis. Again, remember here, it's starting from minus 0.5, so I can do that. And that gives me that graph. So I think either way, you could print off any of those. This just takes the graph back a bit. But generally, you'd probably want it to start from point 0, 0, 0, 0 here. You can choose. Okay, just one last thing to do. We've pretty much set your graph out. What we now need to look at, whoops, I don't know what happened there. What we now need to look at is your layout when this prints. So again, if you go to page layout, you could get some more menus. And what we're looking at is to look at your page setup. So if you go to this extra launch button here, remember you get more menus. Okay, and what we could put in here is a header and a footer. So it's like we did with the chart. If we customize your header, again, we can put in there your name. We can put in your title. We could put in your date or the register class. Now again, some of these menus, remember, this has got a date, so you can do that automatically. You can also put a space and put in a time. Okay, you could put in the page number. Okay, I don't think you need pictures. Okay, and then click OK. Now you don't see that unless you press the print preview. That comes up with a menu. So again, I've got a chart title, but I've also got it up here as well. I'd certainly put your register class in, or your teacher might be helpful as well. So that's what my graph would look like if I printed it out. So obviously it's quite important that your name is on there, because if they all go to the same printer, then who's going to tell whose graph it is? And some of you have got the same data. Whatever you do at the end, please make sure that you've saved. Remember, it will save a copy anyway. Okay, again, know where that you're saving it. So if you're not sure, you can browse your site to show you where you can save it. I'm saving it in the S2 Forces, so that's perfect for me, and I'm going to save it. Okay, please make sure that you know where you're saving it. Again, you could pin that to the top, remember, in your menu bars here. You can pin that, and then you should be able to find that when you come to it next time, because that will be at the top menu. Once you've produced that graph, please get it printed out or get a copy of it and post it to your teacher. Try it, practice it, have a play, get some different data if you want, and hopefully you're on the way to starting being able to be very proficient in Excel. Thank you.